Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is engineer Benny Faccone. First of all, there's a big battle that's shaping up, and it's between the music publishers and Spotify. Basically, anybody that gets royalties from Spotify knows that publishing royalties are about 1/10 of what normal mechanical royalties are. So in other words, if the mechanical royalty is 0.007, then what you're getting from the publishing royalty is 0.0007. So it's hardly anything. Publishers are really upset about that, but they're more upset about another factor, and that's that many times publishers and songwriters aren't getting paid at all, even though the songs are being played. And the reason for that, according to Spotify, is the fact that they don't have enough information in order to pay them. Now, the publishers are actually saying, oh, we think you guys have plenty of information and know how to do it. You're just not paying us on purpose. So the National Music Publishers Association, or NMPA, is basically filing a big lawsuit, as well as many music publishers. So right now there's $365 million worth of lawsuits from publishers against Spotify, and that looks like it's just the beginning. Now, what do the publishers want? They want equity, just like the major labels got. The majors own 18% of Spotify. And, of course, the publishers own 0 right now, and they don't like that. Now, the big problem here is Spotify hasn't been making any money. They've never made dime one. And the only way they can make money is if they go public, one way or the other. And it looked like that was going to happen this year. It may not now because of these lawsuits. Now, there's two big issues here. One is if the publishers actually get equity and they go public, so all of a sudden there's a windfall in profits, who gets that money? The major labels are going to get a lot of dough. But where do you think it's going to go? It's not going to go to the artist. It'll go all to the bottom line. They will not get any royalties, or they'll get a very little piece of the royalty pie. And the publishers will probably do the same thing. So it's not helping the average songwriter, the average artist. So that's one of the big problems. The second big problem, maybe it's even bigger, is the fact that if this pressure keeps on being put on Spotify, wait and see, Spotify isn't going to be around because they're not making money now. And if they get any more pressure, they're certainly not going to make more money in the future, which means that they're not going to be able to go public, which means that they're not going to get any more investment. And guess what? We're down to a world of just Apple, Amazon, and Google. Now, Apple, Amazon, and Google have deep enough pockets that they can actually stand up against any threat from the music business, and they'll happily do that. But do you think that's actually going to be good for the music business? No, it probably isn't. So this is one of those situations where an organization is trying to do the right thing, especially for its stockholders, but may wind up killing the golden goose. So keep a lookout for this because it's kind of ominous, and I'm not so sure that it's actually going to work out to anybody's benefit. If you have any questions or comments, send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. If you want to learn more about the basics of mixing, sign up for my Music Mixing Primer course. Go to mixingprimer.com to learn more. Also, check out my new Hitmakers Club for access to all my courses, monthly workshops and Q&A webinars, a powerful online group, and much more. Go to hitmakersclub.com to find out all about it. Now, if that wasn't enough bad news, we have some bad news in the audio tube world as well. Mike Mathews, who owns New Sensor Corporation, which is the importer, or actually the manufacturer for Sovtek tubes, is actually being harassed by the Russian government. Sovtek tubes are manufactured in Russia from a company that Mike Mathews bought in the early 90s called Expo Pol. And right now they're responsible for 70% of all audio tubes that are being used in the world. Now, yes, there's other places that you can get them from. You can get them from China, you can get them from Yugoslavia. But that being said, most people do like the sound of these Russian tubes, and that's what's used in a lot of audio gear these days. So what's happening over there? Well, the first thing that happened was the factory started to get harassed. And it was harassed by, first, the electricity going off right in the middle of the workday. So that was bad news. The next thing that happened was mysteriously the clean room that you need to make tubes was contaminated. Okay, that's bad news. And then finally what started to happen was thugs would hang around the factory and threaten all of the workers. Okay, so that didn't work. Here's the next thing that happened. All of a sudden, there were these Russian companies that were altering documents like deeds that were saying that Mike Mathews didn't actually own the factory. And guess what? A company owned by the KGB, or actually the FSB, which is the new version of the KGB, definitely owned it. Now, Mathews has managed to keep control of his factory so far, but now the FSB is basically saying, well, we think we're going to take this factory for national security reasons. So obviously, this is not a good turn of events. One of the things that makes you think is, well, what's going to happen if the FSB takes over the factory? Does that mean they're going to actually still continue to make tubes? Are they going to know how to sell tubes, even if they do continue to make them? Are they going to change something? Because right now, everybody kind of likes the way they sound. Will they change something? Will they be able to manage a factory? And Russians aren't known for being good at that. So this is, again, a very ominous turn, and we'll see what happens in the future, but keep your eye on that as well. My guest today is 17-time Grammy winner Benny Faccone. Benny just moved his base of operations from a commercial studio into his home. While that's not that unusual, the fact of the matter is he has a large console and a host of outboard gear, so things got pretty complex very fast. It's an interesting story to hear exactly what he's gone through in order to get his studio going, though, so I spoke with him via phone from his home studio in Thousand Oaks, California. You had a really nice studio, and now you decided to move into your house. So what brought that on?
Well, if we go a little further back than just then, coming from the studio old school world, I got spoiled, unfortunately, then, going to home studios and all these things. But when I was forced to have my own studio, my first one was down in Hollywood. As you know, you were there a few times. And when I built it, I knocked down a wall to give more space, but I was kind of lucky because the room was weird. It was a weird shape. So all I did was I built fiberglass at the time, one of the 902 fiberglass panels, and just put them in certain spots to kind of get rid of some of the pinging and some of the acoustical, things that was going on. So I kind of got lucky with that. And then when I moved to this last studio, the guy that built it before me kind of made it into a designated studio. Although I did a lot of treatments to it, it was kind of built in a angled kind of shaped room. But when I came here and I was going to build my room, I was going to give it a little weird shape, but because of where I'm building it, it's hard to kind of make it weird angles. But asking for advice, some people say, it's better to make a rectangle and then start from there, see what's going on, and then fix it from where you've got. So when I built the room, it was a rectangle room, and the pinging that was going on and the reflections were kind of scary. So this was the first time that I really had to deal with the acoustics of the room, of the bouncing between walls. So does that answer your question?
Well, no, not exactly. So you had another studio, and that was already built, and you were there for, 4 or 5 years. So what?
Well, more like 7.
Oh, it was 7? Okay. Why did you decide to move into your house then?
Well, I think it's the downsizing that, I don't know, I think it's just the nature of the day, having my own studio and having the overhead just wasn't worth it anymore, because everybody is recording on their own, and they just send me files. And I had this big tracking room that was actually kind of good. We tweaked it out where, we were tracking Daryl Hall, Britney Spears, and John Fogerty, and all these fun things here and there. But it was so rare and far and few in between, because everybody has their own either home studio or their living room or bedroom or whatever. It just wasn't worth the overhead. And 90% of the time I was mixing anyway. So it just became, I kind of guess I came into the modern world of just going at home, doing it at home, and getting rid of my overheads. But because, like I said, going back to, I come from that studio and all that, I was about to just do it in my living room and say, oh, heck with it. I don't care about the acoustics. I've got my analog console. I'll mix low and whatever. I don't care what the acoustic sounds like. But I just couldn't do it. So that hence started the whole process of the acoustics and that whole stuff and building a whole special room. So I kind of went a little overboard because of what I'm used to. I just couldn't just mix in a room that wasn't acoustically treated.
Yeah, it's different for you because you're not mixing in the box either. You have a big Trident console, and that's your style. That's what you do. You still stay, on the console when you're mixing, so it's more important. Actually, you have to find a place that accommodates that, first of all.
Oh, yeah, and that's really a pain in the ass. To accommodate a 11-foot console, I can't just do it anywhere. But it's not only so much about that. That's just more like the aesthetics of it, the size. But what's really important to me is the bottom end, and that what I hear in the room is actually true. Because when you go into a room and you listen to something, mixing wise, the bottom end, you don't know if it's right or wrong. And I want to make sure what I hear in the room, when I take it out, it sounds better rather than different or too much bottom end or not enough bottom end. And a lot of people that are mixing really low, the acoustics don't matter as much, but then I just don't know what kind of bottom end and top end that I have. So, again, coming from old school, that was really important to know the whole spectrum of the frequencies between the top end and bottom end. So, hence, yes, that's more of a pain in the ass rather than the size of it, even though I do enjoy more analog mixing and having my hands on the fader, definitely.
But you do some stuff in the box still, though, right? I mean, not the entire mix, but there are certain things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's still the analog console. If it's not a duality or something like that, it's still limited to how much I can do. But the depth and the openness of a console just can't beat that. So that's why I still like the console itself. My console is modified where it'll go down to 20 hertz, and the perspective of it and the width. Like if you hear a mix in the box, it's almost like it's at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, the panning, as opposed to full 180 degrees. So that's the difference for me between in the box. But I do plugins in the box, a lot of effects kind of plugins, not so much EQs, some compressors, but so I'm kind of 50-50, but I do all my moves and rides on the console.
What was the hardest thing, do you think, making the transition going from your previous studio to a brand new place in your house?
Man, that's a good question, because I've been working on this room for 2 months now, and I still haven't powered up because I know until it's ready that I don't want to hear it because of the acoustics of the room. So that's one thing. I'm afraid to listen, but it'll probably take me a couple of months to get used to it, just like the last studio did. Coming from, the Conways and all those other places, when you walk in, you know what you got, even though the rooms sound different from one studio to another. But man, when you have your home studio, it's really a learning process, how it sounds. And that's what I'm going to have to do with this room. Next week, when I have all the acoustical panels put up, then I'm teaching old dog new tricks, I guess is a saying. I'm just going to turn it on and start listening and getting used to it. I guess, I could jump into it, but it's a learning curve. It's going to take me a while to figure out what it sounds like, because even though everything is exactly the same, it's not going to sound the same.
Now, you have an 11-foot console. Was that difficult getting in?
Well, in the last place, I had to tear down a big room, a wall, so that the angle could turn coming outside the control room kind of turning and then going outside the door. So I had to knock down a big wall. And then coming to the house, I had my side door going into, I guess, my garage. It was one panel door. I turned it into a French door because it was too small, and I had to knock out about 4 more feet of wall so the angle of the console could fit in. So I had about, maybe 3, 6, about 10 foot open wall that I had to cut on the side of my house. Yeah, it was a pain. I was going to say, luckily, contractors, to them, it's no big deal. That they can bang out a wall and put it back up in no time. To them, it's no problem. But for me, it's like freaking out.
Yeah, it would be traumatic for me too, I think. Well, okay, so you said you had to knock out a wall or a portion of a wall to get the console in your old place. How about getting it out? What did you do?
Same thing. I had to knock out that same wall. See, when I came in, I had movers do it. That's the other thing. I just couldn't move it myself. I literally had to. I've got 72 modules. I had to pull them all out one by one and carry those separately. Have a moving company come and take the console just like they would a piano or anything else, and basically see them, put it on its side and put the harness in and wheel it out, kind of a thing. And when we brought it from my old space in Hollywood, which was a direct out from the room to the door, it was no problem because just one straight shot. This last place before I came to the house, the guy came and measured, and he said, "Oh, that the walls are the ceilings are high enough, so we can just stand it up on its side." Because what happens is when we brought it in, it had to turn 90 degrees to go through the control room door, and there was a wall there from another existing room. So. Kind of said, okay, no problem. The day that they came to move, they lifted it up, and it was off by 1 inch.
Oh.
It would not go all the way up. So you have to put it on it's on the top and kind of swerve it, turn it, and then go from left, turn it 90 degrees, and then go straight into the door. But because we couldn't do that, we either had to knock out the ceiling to about 2 inches, or knock out a wall. We just chose to knock out a wall. So when I was taking the console back out, I knew I had to do the same thing. But this time I was prepared because I knew how big a wall that I had to knock out.
Wow.
So it wasn't so bad. It was just the construction and deconstruction of the place that was tough.
So basically, you knocked out 2 walls. One at the old place and one at the new to make this happen.
Right. Well, yeah. This one coming into my house, it was the side door, and what it is on the side, it kind of comes at an angle. And 11 feet is pretty big when you have to fit it at an angle. So you need like 20 feet of space to go sideways. It's really weird. But even when I opened up the wall thinking I had enough space to bring it in here, when they came, we had to knock out about 2 more feet of wall. So I had the construction guy stay just in case, because the movers charge like $200 an hour. So you have to take cost into consideration when you do this stuff, and just kind of weigh the options. What's cheaper?
Wow. How long did it take you to actually get it up and running? I know that you haven't done any sessions or anything, but I know you've also proofed the console to make sure it works. So how long did it take you to get that going?
Well, I figured building the room was going to take about a month, but it took about a month and a half. But as soon as I had an electrician or this girl who's great at, she disconnects and reconnects. There's so much cabling and stuff to deal with that I had her come and disconnect everything, and obviously she marked where everything goes, which took her about 4 hours to disconnect. And then when we moved everything in, she came maybe 3 days later, and it took her about 9 hours to reconnect everything. That process isn't that bad. It's just coordinating and getting the movers, the electrical stuff happening and all that stuff. So it's more manual labor than it is anything else. And just turning off the computer, bringing your Pro Tools drives and all that stuff is a little more complicated.
Well, let's talk about electrical for a second, because you had to put a new service in, right?
Well, I wanted to be sure. Well, first of all, with the console and all, you have to. I didn't want to plug it into the house system and start getting buzzes, or if somebody turns on a hairdryer or a vacuum cleaner, all of a sudden I can't work because I got a ground hum from that. So yeah, just like my old studio, I had clean power brought in, so I had a complete separate circuit, and I have a transformer that it goes through for clean power. So when I came here and I turned everything on, I went full blast, and on my monitor side where I have all my effects returns, it was really quiet. It kind of freaked me out because I thought, wow, it's so quiet. It's a lot more quiet than even the last two studios, that I thought that maybe there was something wrong with my monitor side. But because this clean power is it literally is only about 10 feet away from the panel. It's so clean that I don't have any buzzes, any hisses, nothing. And it was just quiet.
Wow.
My last two studios, I had to bring clean power in also, but luckily it was already there. I just kind of had to tap into it and bring it in. But here I had to do all new lines. Same thing with the AC, where you never think about, if you make a room, if you tap into the AC into the house, then what happens is you have to turn the AC on for the whole house, just so you can cool off your room that you're going to be working in 5, 6, 10 hours a day. So it makes more sense to have a separate AC unit. And I chose one of those mini split systems where, like they have in condos and stuff.
Yeah.
But then I got worried, because if you put one of those things in the room, when you turn it on, one of those big units that's just up on the wall, I didn't want all that fan noise coming on. So I kind of upgraded still the mini split system, but it's with ducts. So it's a lot more quiet.
I've seen the mini split work in a couple of studios without that, but I'm sure it's better with the ducting, and it probably feels better too.
It is. Oh, it's so much quiet. You don't really hear it. So for that, I'm kind of glad I did it that way, rather than, when you turn it on, one of those systems that you put on the wall in the room, it's basically like a window fan, almost the same thing, maybe not as loud. And then you've got that, it just depending on, if you make it really high level, you really hear it blowing quite a bit. But with this, I don't hear it at all. My only thing is, after I put it in, that I realized is that because, getting into, the construction of the room, I wanted to make it very airtight. And if I wanted to work at 2:00 in the morning in my home, I didn't want to disturb anybody in the house. So I wanted to make it very insulated. So that's why I chose certain materials that I put in. But what happens is when you put the AC, like in the house, you have an air intake where it kind of recirculates. In here, I never put one in, because one of those mini split systems, it usually doesn't have an air intake, because in the house you have cracks in the windows and the doors, so there's always some kind of circulation going through. But because in this room it's so airtight that the AC isn't as efficient, because it's just recirculating air all the time. So now I have to think about how to put in an air intake vent. All these little things that you don't think about until you start doing it, and you go, oh crap, this happens if I don't do this. So there's all little like repercussions to the choices you make.
How about the acoustics? Did you have a designer or did you do it yourself?
Well, I did it myself, but I always ask people. One of my favorite go-to guys is Ben O'May. He's the head tech over at Bernie Grumman. He always gives me really good suggestions. And my first room, which was about 12 years ago over in Hollywood, the things that we would do was all, the fiberglass. And I would make panels and put this 902 fiberglass in the panels and hang them up. But what that does is it makes the room tight, and the reflections of the sounds are kind of contained, but it makes the room dark.
Yeah.
So this time I asked them, and they're always learning everything new about acoustics, I guess. And so I talked to them, and now the things that I guess this isn't, a secret that they do, but now everybody uses polyfill, which is, I guess, similar to pillow stuffing. So when they make panels with that, and what happens is it controls the acoustics just like fiberglass does, but it doesn't make it dark sounding. So it just kind of keeps it alive and without messing with the acoustics, if that makes sense.
Did you use any 702 or anything then? Did you use any fiberglass?
Because of the cost, and I didn't want to throw all my existing stuff away, I did. I built about 20 panels that in my first room I put as my fake ceiling. So I did the same thing, and I put the fiberglass panels, so that's basically the majority of the fiberglass that I used because they were already built, and for cost purposes, polyfill isn't cheap. So I used the ceiling with the 902, and my side walls. I made panels, and I had the carpenter make them kind of specifically for what I wanted. They're not flat; they're more rounded panels. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot more fun. I learned a lot about upholstering, and each one took a couple of hours to do. But so I have that on the sides, so it's almost like my side walls have these roundness to it. So it's not only about I'm trying to think of the right words. It also acts as a diffusion for the frequencies because it's round as opposed to flat panels.
Yeah, right.
And again, next week I'm going to fire it up and I'm going to see where I'm at. But when you walk into a room, you can already hear certain problems. So before I want to hear it, I want to fix those problems and see where to go from there. So that's basically what I'm doing. And for my back wall, I'm keeping what I had in the last two studios, which is basically, I bought this big theatrical dual pane, heavy thick curtain that I hang up in my back wall. And that seems to help the bass trap without spending a lot of money in building a bass trap.
I see. Yeah. Do you have a recording space in case you need to?
I don't. I've got like little a corridor walking from my house to the studio that down the road I can probably close off and make that into like a small little amp or vocal booth. But I think the day of doing drums at my place or that kind of stuff, it's not worth it. For the amount of time, usually if you're doing a project, you do drums for maybe a day. The setup, the getting drum sounds and not getting them as good as you would as if you go to a really good studio, it's just not worth it. So if somebody wants me to record drums or that kind of stuff, I'd rather go somewhere else. And eventually I'll have a little space for vocals and the little things that the room isn't as important as it would if you're doing strings or drums or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That seems to be the way that everyone is doing it anymore, unless you have a lot of dough and you know you're going to be tracking all the time, if you're an artist or something.
But people don't realize how important a room is, especially for drums. If you go bass DI, no big deal. Obviously, what's important is your mix room. But for drums, doing it in a living room is that mentality of just putting a mic in front of something and it'll sound good. It really is not the right way. It's really the room is what creates that instrument to sound good or not. You can have the most amazing drum kit and the most amazing mics, but if that room doesn't give it a good sound, you kind of break that chain of a good recording.
Since you were changing so much in that it's a new room and you were basically rebuilding everything, did you decide to do anything equipment-wise or upgrade anything while you're doing this?
No, I'm keeping everything the same. That's the great thing about having the analog, knock on wood, is that there's no need to upgrade because it always sounds good. I think today, the Pro Tools are making it better and better from 8 to 10 and now to 12, which I haven't gone to 12 or even 11. And I heard that 12 supposedly sounds really good, especially if you go with the new hardware. It makes everything sound better. But because I have the analog, it doesn't matter to me because what matters is the analog gear, and it always makes it sound good. I just use the Pro Tools as kind of like a tape machine.
Do you mix back the Pro Tools?
I do mix back the Pro Tools. I wish I had analog to mix back to, but it's become too expensive. People don't want to spend the money, or it gets too complicated, too hard to have tape machines. And sometimes it does sound better on Pro Tools. I got to admit, it's a different sound. But what I'm working on now is trying to get another rig to print back to, rather than just printing back to the same session.
I see. That's what all the mastering guys do.
Yeah. They record onto their systems. Yeah. But here, when they send me, and a lot of people still record in 44.1, which, to me, compared to 96 sounds so much better. I don't know why. I guess they think it doesn't, but then I'm stuck to printing the mix back onto 44.1. If I had my own system, I could mix everything back down to 96, which to me sounds better.
Yeah.
So that's the main reason why I want a separate rig. But either from just never had the time or the it costs or whatever. I haven't really done that yet, but that's going to be the next thing as soon as I get situated in this room.
So most of what you do is in the Latin realm. How much has that changed?
The Latin world has changed and evolved or disevolved, whatever you want to say, in the last few years. A lot has happened, and I believe it or not, I don't do as much. I do a lot of independent Latin stuff, which is what I like to do usually. Sometimes, you don't get the greatest of stuff because of the budget. But there's this reggaeton stuff that's happening in Mexico in the last couple of years that everybody's doing this reggaeton style of music in Colombia. That's where it's all coming from. And, they do it at their house. They do it. Everything is all through computers, Fruity Loops, or whatever they use now. So it's like the hip hop here in 25 years ago, whenever it was, just the beginning of that, where they were just using all these little samples and stuff like that. So I don't get as much work from Latin music. The other thing that's happened is, believe it or not, Mexico, has money. They're not the poor country that America thinks they are, and they were coming up here because of the musicians, because of the studios, because of the quality that they were getting up here. But it also cost them money. And when the peso went up to, at a point, it was at 22 pesos to the dollar. Now it's back down to 17. It used to be about 12 or 14. People and wealthy people started recording their own, building their own studios, and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've been to a few of them in the beginning of the year. I went to a couple in January and one in March, and did some stuff. And you walk in, and it's like gorgeous. It's beautiful. They, a lot of them have dualities and the typical new stuff of today. And some even had some great old equipment like APIs and even Fairchilds. But then you listen to the acoustics of the room, and it's horrible because they don't understand what a studio should really sound like. They know what it should look like. And they only charge $300 a day.
Wow.
Including an engineer. So you can't compete with that. And labels and everybody else, they're staying down there and they're doing that. So it's funny because in the last couple of years, I did some Britney stuff, Britney Spears and Daryl Hall, and now I'm doing some Richard Carpenter. So it's kind of, I don't know if the world is trying to tell me something, but it's coming back to what I used to do back in the 80s. So it's kind of like maybe the cycle of life is starting to close in.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I've watched your career trajectory. I guess Maná was the one that really got you into that whole Latin thing when you did a big hit with it, or hits, I should say.
Well, yeah, it was kind of Maná. I'm not sure if it was Maná or Luis Miguel. Those were the two big ones that, back then, everybody, they had to go to a studio and they had to use, you needed a budget. It was, I was lucky, I think, because, got those people that nobody knew. I didn't even know who they were, but I'm never one to say no, so I was able to be there and record with them, and part of a team that I think was a great composer and great songs, and that's how my name got started in the Latin world for sure. Between the two of them, I think it was real irony because Maná was more of what I guess down in Mexico considered a rock band. And Luis Miguel was more like a ballad, Frank Sinatra kind of, orchestral kind of stuff. So nobody ever really knew what I did because some people go, "Oh, that guy's good for rock stuff. He's probably no good for the other stuff." And then the people who hear the Maná stuff, they go, "Oh man, this guy, he doesn't know how to do strings. He only knows how to do guitars and that kind of stuff." So they try and pigeonhole you. And I think I was lucky that I wasn't pigeonholed. That's probably why I got to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, you did a lot of different Latin music as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all over the place. That was the fun thing that, until you get the singers or whatever on there, it was basically anything from rock to, orchestral. Went to Abbey Road and do strings and the whole thing. So I can't complain. It wasn't straight ahead what you think, Latin music is. So we treated it as American music or English music until the vocals got put on, and then we're doing Latin stuff.
Before I let you go, there's one story that I want to hear from you, and that's when you were working with Julio and you got sick.
Mm-hmm. Well, that had nothing to do with the recording part of it. We were doing with this guy, Robbie Draco Rosa, who we did a lot of Ricky Martin stuff, and an amazing artist in his own right, and singer and all that. But he's very alternative type of stuff. So Julio wanted to do something different on this record. So we recorded some of the stuff here. It was the first time we used a Pro Tools guy. I didn't even know what I knew what Pro Tools was, but I didn't even know how to create a new track. That's how new Pro Tools was. But he had this demo that he loved, the drummer and the guitar player that was on it, that Julio he liked the songs and he wanted to keep the vibe of the demo. So he gave this Pro Tools operator the files, and because the demo wasn't recorded with Click, so we were going to put orchestra and this whole thing on it. So he gave it to the guy, and he brought it back, and he totally quantized the crap out of it, and he was so proud of how great and tight it sounded. And you listen to it, and the whole vibe is gone. And we were like, oh man, totally ruined it. But that's not the story. That was just a side story. But what happened was, after we recorded everything here, he wanted to do the vocals in Miami, so we flew there, and we did vocals there, and we were there for 2 weeks, and at the Hit Factory. And me being a coffee drinker, I love coffee. I drink it all the time. These guys were giving me Cuban coffee. They called it cortaditos. And they were like little shots of espresso with a lot of sugar and milk. So every morning I tell them to bring me like 5 or 10 of them and just put them behind me, because they're like little shots. It's not like drinking a whole cup of American coffee. So I started drinking that stuff, and it's actually amazing coffee. I'd be drinking it throughout the day, and without realizing how addicting it was and how addicted I was to it. When I got back home, I was drinking so much coffee that I started to get insomnia because I was drinking so much. And that kind of led to a downward spiral. I wasn't getting any sleep, and I just basically had a caffeine overdose one time. And the first day we were mixing, Julio, I got so sick I was almost hallucinating, because I hadn't slept for all these days, and I had to just stop. And I was home for 5 days like an old man sitting in my rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket, and just like freaking out over coffee overdose. Is that the story?
That's the story. Yeah. People don't understand how powerful coffee can be, especially like that. But there you go.
I know. And guess what? I'm drinking coffee as we speak.
I'm not surprised. Okay, last question. I don't remember when you were on. I think you were number 5. This is podcast number 171, and you were one of the early ones. So I didn't ask this question back then, but I ask everybody a question now. It's a little off the subject a little bit. What's the best piece of business advice that you either learned along the way or maybe somebody imparted to you?
Wow. I remember you asked me that last time, and I still have to scratch my head and see and think about that. I don't know if I answered it the same way, but this always keeps coming back to me. And every time the most, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's about music, and there's 2 different things. It's the business, and then there's the music. The business side is always something you have to be careful and you have to kind of pursue, because you have to make a living out of it. But the one thing that I always do whenever I do a project is that, even as bad as it could be, whatever it is, I have to like it before I let it go. And I think, when you do a project, that's your business card. And I do it as best I can, because that's the only way I get my next job is from my previous job. That's my thinking anyway. So I think business-wise is always trying to do the best I can. And by that meaning, how make it feel good and just doing something that I'm proud of doing. Because if I think that way, that I'm hoping whoever listens to it and goes, wow, this is pretty cool, I want this guy to work on my project. So I'm always thinking of my next gig from the gig that I'm doing now, and try and do the best I can.
Brilliant.
It's not a business thing. Well, it's more, trying to it's about the music, the people, you get a name and all that, but the proof is in the pudding. If you don't put out what somebody likes, then it doesn't matter what your name is. They always go by what you do, not who you are. I think so. It's trying to make the best you can, and about music still has to be about feel, not about how quick you can do it and how much money you can make out of it.
Brilliant.
Somebody said that'll come. If the money will come, you just have to make it right, and then everything else will come.
I love it. Excellent, Benny. Thanks for taking the time today to talk to me.
Well, hopefully we can do another one and I can show you my new studio, my new space.
Yeah, I'm really interested. I remember your house a little bit, and I remember your garage a little bit.
The size of the room is pretty big. It's 16 by 18 feet. So it's a good size. It's about the same size as, or a little bigger than my last studio. The trick to this was treating it and making a sound acoustic, because it's a rectangle. It's not like my other studios that had kind of weird shapes to it. So I don't know if people today, when they walk in a room and they set up their Pro Tools, if that's something they think about, or they'll just, prop their speakers on there and they'll just listen. I'm going back to home studios now, because I don't have a studio to record, like I said, with this project that I'm doing. And basically, it's more set for a composer, that they put their, dual screens, they plop their speakers on there, and they go ahead and work. And then an engineer, if there's such a thing as an engineer anymore, or a mixer, they'll sit down and you have to adjust to how a composer listens, as opposed to how an engineer or a mixer would listen.
Yeah, it's two completely different things, and I think that most people really don't think about that. They don't think about the sound or moving things around until it sounds better, or none of that, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, and that's what happened last week when I went to this guy when I started with Richard, where I brought my own speakers, but I had to move. He had his two screens. I got rid of one screen and just put one in the center, because when you put things in between speakers, there's reflections and things. So it's all about hearing. And it's not about watching your files. It's about what you're listening for. And he was kind of surprised that I started doing that. And we spent an hour moving speakers around and moving stuff around. But that's if you can't hear properly, I don't know. I guess people, when they sit in a room, they just adjust to whatever they hear. But the question is, what you're hearing, is that true or not? When you walk out, you make copy something for them to listen to. When they hear it at home, are they gonna hear what they've been hearing, or are they gonna hear something totally different?
Yeah.
It is a process, just like everything else. And hopefully, you never know what you got until you start hearing. You can make it. I remember. Do you have time, or do I have a story?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was at A&M, which is now Henson Studios. I was pretty much the last guy to do a session in all of those rooms before they gutted it and make it what it is today. So Studio A, I did the last session in there. As soon as we were done, they got it, and Shelly Yakis took it over and redid that whole room, and the same thing with B and C and D. And in Studio B, which had API console, this great studio, Carole King did Tapestry there, Gladys Knight, Lionel Richie did his solo records there. When the new people came in and gutted it, they were the rockers with, bringing in Bruce Springsteen and stuff. They spent, Vincent Van Hoff was the designer, millions of dollars designing it. And as soon as they finished, with the design, you would think you're going to have an amazing studio. Rod Stewart was the first session. It sounded horrible because you never know when you design something, if it's going to, sound good or not. And they literally had to stop the session and just not start from scratch, but tear down certain things to make it sound better
Yeah, I heard that too.
after spending millions of dollars.
Hopefully you won't have to do that.
Yeah. No.
To learn more about Benny, go to bennyfaccone.com. That's Benny, B-E-N-N-Y, Faccone, F-A-C-C-O-N-E. All one word, bennyfaccone.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com, or you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, and Google Play. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll also find a sign-in form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.